Hello, and welcome to another edition of BeaverFinance. I'm your host, Robert T. Anderson. In today's series, we're here to talk to you about emergency funds. Now, this is part 2 of a 2-part series on emergency funds. If you'd like to check out part 1, please go to our profile and check out my interview on the Smart Finance Moves show, where we talk about what is an emergency fund, how to fund an emergency fund, and tips and tricks on how to maximize your emergency fund. In today's video, I'm going to outline the 5 tips on how to structure your emergency fund and how that could look like. So, without further ado, let's get on with the video. So, emergency funds. Tip 1 would be to set up a checking account. Now, I would recommend a separate checking account. So not your primary checking account where you may have your payroll deposit set up or your regular pay. I would set up either a separate checking account. So whether that's at a different institution, perhaps an online bank that may not charge a monthly fee, that would be a great option for you. If it can be included in your banking package at your main institution, you can set up that second checking account. Tip number 2 would be to set up a regular savings account. So this could also be done at your primary institution, so your primary bank or credit union. So this could also be a high yield savings account. Now, at a traditional bank, typically high yield doesn't exist anymore. We have very low interest rates right now. However, you may be able to shop around and still find an interest rate above 1%. Now, don't be tricked on promo rates where they may pay you north of 1% for a few months and then the fee drops down or the interest rate drops down. So do take a look at the fine print. You don't want to have to be moving your savings around, especially considering it is an emergency fund. And honestly, we don't want you to have to use it anyways. So definitely a savings account because you do want that money accessible. Second, could be a tax-free savings account. Now, if you do, want to layer your emergency fund, you may keep a few thousand or maybe 1 or 2 months in a savings account, and then you can do another few thousand or 1 to 2 months in your tax-free savings account. Ideally, we do want that 3 to 6 months expenses in an emergency fund. So however you decide to do it, you want something that's very accessible right away, hence the savings account. And then the tax-free savings account, you do have to be mindful withdrawals can take anywhere from 2 to 3 business days typically on average. So it may not be accessible right away if an emergency does come up, but it is smart to layer your savings because your TFSA, then you can potentially focus on yielding a little higher interest rate or return if you're taking on a little bit of risk, which you can do in your TFSA, of course. So I would do that. Also, it is tax sheltered because it is a registered account, and withdrawals are also tax-free. If you want to learn more about tax-free savings accounts, we also have a video on TFSAs. Please go check that out. And next would be a savings account or tax-free savings account combined with a line of credit. This would be another great option. Also layering your emergency fund in structure. So you've got savings account that's very liquid, accessible, TFSA that you could get in a few days, potentially earn a higher return, and then lastly the line of credit. Because ideally we don't want you using the emergency fund or on a year-to-year basis, you might not even use the emergency fund. And that is money going to waste and not working for you. So If we can have an empty line of credit just sitting there, that's at least not tying up your own money. Now, obviously, we don't encourage you to go into debt, but we do encourage you to be smart about your money. Tip number 4 would be to avoid GICs. The whole purpose of an emergency fund is so that the money is accessible, and also interest or high yield savings accounts can be comparable or competitive at least with a GIC. And with a high yield savings account, you don't have to lock in your money. Whereas with a GIC, you would have to lock in for whether a year, 2, 3, 4, or 5 years. And if emergency came up, we don't want any money being tied up. So it's not worth the interest rate, especially in today's market. So remember, avoid GICs in an emergency fund. And lastly, avoid using your credit card. So this would be, a high interest credit card. Some people say, oh, I've got a credit card for emergencies. Well, that's great, but you don't want to be paying high interest. I'd say, if you're going to be paying any interest, or if you run into a bind and you, use up your savings account TFSA and then you're using credit, I would use the line of credit. Hence the line of credit versus credit card, I would avoid. Obviously, use your credit card for day-to-day expenses, maximize those points, use it to your advantage, continue to build credit, your credit history, that's great. But don't use it, avoid it at all costs for your emergency fund. Bonus tip here, we also want to make sure you're not dipping into your emergency fund to fund your any day-to-day or annual expenses that come up regularly. So these would be expenses like, for example, if you had paid your auto insurance annually to save a month's premium, we don't want you tapping into your emergency fund. You could set up what's called a sinking fund. So this would be a fund that you would take, for example, in that auto insurance example, you would take the annual amount and divide it by 12 and start to put that amount of money into another savings account that we would call your sinking fund. And then every year that money's there, you can make that annual payment and you're not tapping into your emergency fund and you're not scrambling for that money. Another example, people use that for Christmas gifts, right? You can take your Christmas gift budget, again, divide it by 12, and then, once October, November, or even December comes up, you've got the money there for Christmas gifts. Takes the pressure off. December takes the stress out of things. And then obviously, once we can travel again, sinking fund is perfect for saving for travel expenses, and you would use it the exact same way. So that's another bonus tip, obviously, on how to avoid dipping into your emergency fund for things that aren't an emergency. They're regular expenses. Now, how do I structure my emergency fund? Well, I do use that layering method that I talked to you about. So that, for me, is I keep a certain balance. So at BMO, I have the performance plan, and so I keep at least $4,000 in my checking account to not pay banking fees. I've got that cash there that if there was an emergency, I can always use the cash in my checking account. Now, I also keep a few thousand in my savings account, earn a little bit of interest, but I want it to be accessible. I'd actually go to the savings account first for anything as opposed to the checking, but I got those working as a team together. And second, then I have my second layer, or my third layer even, is my tax-free savings account. So the tax-free savings account is predominantly, I have a few funds that are mutual funds that are for retirement. So they're heavy in tech and U.S. equities, and also alternative health. So focusing on vaccines, things like that. But then majority of it is in a balanced fund. So a balanced fund is 60% equities or exposed to the stock market, 40% bonds or fixed income, so incorporating government debt. If we look at any 3-month period over the last 10, 12 years, only a handful of times has it ever been negative. And also I've got some good gains built in. So, if things did take a dip or I did need to dip into it myself, whether that's, market conditions or myself needing to dip into it, I've got some breathing room there. Even during COVID 2020, I did make over 10% in a balanced fund, which, for not taking a lot of risk, I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm not tying up too much cash, not working for me, which is also the important piece. So that's how I structure my emergency fund. I do also have a line of credit though. So keeping that in mind, a line of credit can also serve in that purpose. If you did miss out on our last video on emergency funds, I do have that interview with John Matthews on Smart Finance Show. You can check that out on our profile on YouTube. We go over what is an emergency fund, how to best fund it, and then tips and tricks on how to maximize your emergency fund, and use your resources most effectively. Watch out for our future videos, obviously, so please like this video, subscribe, so you'll find out about our future videos. We would like you to obviously join us on our journey of personal finance education. And then lastly, question of the day, we'd really want to know your experience with emergency funds. What's been a success for you? How do you structure your emergency fund? Let us know below. Do you use any of our methods that we talked about today? Did we miss any? I'm sure other viewers are wanting to hear your success, your ideas as well. And if there's anything you want to see in a future video, also let us know. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. And we've got a lot of daily content out all the time, and we'd love to have you watch one of our future videos. So thanks for tuning in.